The NFL coaching cycle has officially come to an end, at least head coaching wise, and we look at who the biggest winner of it all was. All that and more coming up next on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts here on our network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for tuning in today to Locked On NFL, making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That's in video form on YouTube, audio form, wherever you get your shows. Be sure to subscribe and follow along for 5 days a week of NFL content every week. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are back here bringing you the biggest stories throughout the week, NFL style. The Super Bowl is going to be next week, so we'll be talking a lot more about that next Monday. But we officially got to the end of the NFL coaching cycle, at least from a head coach perspective, as Dan Quinn was the last head coach hired. Mike Macdonald was right before him. We're going to be talking about who won this NFL coaching cycle. We're going to get opinions from David Harrison of Locked On Commanders about Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury going to Washington. And in the second part of the show, Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks will join us to talk about Mike Macdonald over there in Seattle. Then finally, Tyler Rowland, Locked On Titans, will talk to us about Brian Callahan and that Tennessee Titans team and if he was the right hire for them. Then at the end of the show, I'll give my opinion about who I think won the head coaching carousel this year. So without any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with David Harrison of Locked On Commanders. The Washington Commanders were the last of the party in terms of hiring their head coach, and they got their guy, essentially, in Dan Quinn. Here to talk about that with me and much more. It's David Harrison, the host of Locked On Commanders. And David, Washington, they waited and waited and waited and waited. Head coaching candidate after head coaching candidate coming off the board, or in Ben Johnson's case, just completely removing himself from the Commanders' head coaching job. But Dan Quinn was the choice for them. I know to some it was a bit underwhelming. Are you happy with the hire for Washington, or do you think they could have taken more advantage of the guys that were out there?
I think they definitely could have taken more advantage of the guys that were out there. I'm also happy that there is a hire made, because now I can, as we're looking at draft prospects and free agents and who to re-sign and who to sign, I mean, who they're going to play for, what scheme they're going to play in is huge in that, that. And so now I can move forward and kind of say, at least on the defensive side of things, and be like, hey, here's what Dan Quinn likes to do. Here's the evolution of his defense, and here's who fits, here's who doesn't fit, and here's where the gaps are. So we can start trying to make some logical sense of some potential pieces that come in. To say Dan Quinn was my first choice would be a flat out lie, and I don't think anybody outside of Dan Quinn's household would say that Dan Quinn was their first choice to be the head coach of the Washington Commanders. I mean, if you just look at the process that the Washington Commanders went through, Dan Quinn's Dallas Cowboys were eliminated, a week right prior to any of the other major candidates. So if Dan Quinn was their guy, so to speak, they could have had him in the building a week earlier and be fleshing out their staff a week prior to what they're actually doing. So that alone just kind of shows you that he's not there. He wasn't there, number one guaranteed slam dunk candidate. And then between, flying to Detroit and having Ben Johnson tell him thanks, but no thanks, Mike Macdonald getting swept off his feet to Seattle, you just get the sense that there were, at best case scenario, I guess you could say maybe Dan Quinn was their number 3 choice, which, I suppose getting your number 3 guy, isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. But you also have the Bobby Slowick situation where he takes an increased payday the same day Ben Johnson. So the same day Ben Johnson pulls out of the race, the same day Mike Macdonald is being swept off his feet by the Seattle Seahawks, Bobby Slowick agrees to an increased deal with the Houston Texans to stay there. Maybe they're a coincidence. I don't really believe in coincidences, so I kind of feel like somewhere behind the scenes, and I have no confirmation of this, but I feel like somewhere behind the scenes, maybe Washington got Bobby Slowick on the phone. Houston did the right thing and paid their guy to stay in the house. And so really Dan Quinn's probably your 4th choice at best. But to me, he was kind of always the 7th. We've talked about this. Anthony Weaver, defensive coach for the Baltimore Ravens, who's now, unfortunately for me with the Miami Dolphins, was on that list. Aaron Glenn was even ahead of Dan Quinn on that list. And then rewind all the way to the beginning of January, Raheem Morris, who now is coaching the Falcons, was ahead of Dan Quinn on that list. So, again, but the great thing about the NFL, though, Kevin, that we've both lived and these fans completely understand is what is good or not, or good or bad news in the offseason rarely ever directly translates to the regular season. So these feelings and narratives are all going to disappear, and then we'll see which ones pop up in July, August, September.
And some breaking news here that we have on Locked On NFL is Dave and I are getting ready to record this. The Commanders make an offensive coordinator hire. Obviously, the coordinator for them last season was Eric Bieniemy. That's no longer going to be the case. It's Cliff Kingsbury, who was going to get the Raiders job, then pulled out of the Raiders job. Now he's going to Washington to be the Commanders offensive coordinator. So, David, your raw initial reaction of the Commanders making this hire, and if you think it was the right one for the team.
Yeah, I mean, look, whether it's the right one or not, I don't get into those conversations because that's going to be results based. You know what I mean? That's something that we can tell you in September, October, November, December, 3 years from now, this year, whatever. But I'll just tell you, I'm not excited about the decision. And it's funny because I'm watching social media's reaction, and I'm watching some fan reaction, and I'm watching some media member, react, people that I, respect and trust in this industry, and they're very excited. And so, part of me is kind of sitting there going, okay, well, what's wrong with me? And over the days and over the weeks to come, I'll do some more research than I've already done. And I'll kind of, I'll try to counter my confirmation bias, because we all want to be right. I'm going to have Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals on my show. I have a feeling he's not going to be much help in me countering my opinion. But we'll see what he has to say when he comes on the program. But look, this is a guy, Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, when he got hired to be a head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, a lot of people had these questions. How does a coach struggle and lose and fail to succeed in the college ranks and then get an NFL head coaching opportunity? Well, my next question would be, how does a college coach struggle and fail in opportunities in college, get an NFL head coaching opportunity, fail in that NFL head coaching opportunity, and then spend 1 year advising a quarterback who won the Heisman the year before he advised him? And that's really the main thruster being attached to Cliff Kingsbury's back to get him back in the NFL, is advising a guy who advised a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. I don't know, in the world of coaching, Kevin, that doesn't move the needle for me when you say, well, hey, I took this Heisman Trophy winner and he had another good season after that. That doesn't really do it to me. You know what I mean? So I'm going to have to wrap my head around that. But, initially, like you said, minutes after this news is breaking, that is my initial response. So, that's the honest truth, because that's what I'm going to give you.
Yeah, we'll see how it pans out for Washington. But you mentioned, David, that now you can just kind of focus on the draft and free agency targets and positions of need. And I think that's very refreshing for you and Commanders fans, because it was a very long, drawn-out process. As you look at this roster as it is, free agency, and the players that Washington is either going to have to bring back or see walk, what are some of the biggest needs that you see for this team in the coming months ahead as they try to fill out this roster?
Yeah, I mean, the two biggest needs, you need an offensive line, and you need a quarterback that can move, because that's what Cliff Kingsbury's offense, just from what I already know, what I've already studied from him being one of the more popular candidates for this job. His game, his play calling, his scheme is going to be dictated, or is going to rely heavily on deep passes. Fortunately for Caleb Williams supporters, Caleb Williams also likes to rely on deep passes, so it kind of seems like a marriage made in heaven. But if Caleb Williams has the same amount of time and same amount of protection that Sam Howell had early in his first season as a starter, it's not going to go well. And Caleb Williams can certainly move better than Sam Howell can, but in the NFL, it's going to catch up to you eventually. And the last thing that anybody wants to see is another RG3 situation, which ironically also happened in Washington, because he was a mobile quarterback that didn't have enough protection from his coordinator and scheme and offensive line. And, the injuries ended up derailing his career pretty rapidly. So, that's got to be priority number one. And obviously, if the Washington Commanders are going to go after Caleb Williams, best case scenario, they're going to spend their first round draft pick on him. Worst case scenario, they're going to spend their first round pick and other picks to trade up to get him. And that's going to take away from your ability to draft linemen for him. So we'll see what the free agent class looks like and how they spend there. But yeah, that's got to be the first two things. I mean, even before you get to Dan Quinn's defense and all that stuff, I don't care how great your defense is. If you can't protect your quarterback, you're dead in the water.
We'll see how it all pans out for the Commanders over there. Check out David's work over the Locked On Commanders podcast and on Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be talking with Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks about Mike Macdonald. Stay tuned for that. A lot to get to on Locked On NFL. First, this episode is brought to you by DoorDash. And For me, I love food. I'm a big food guy. And whether that's the game day package like pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or whether it's stuff like chips, dips, nachos, like the snack package, I'm all for it. And when I'm watching a game, if the game goes to timeout, if it's halftime, if it's a 2-minute warning, I know that that's my cue to order in with DoorDash, or whenever the game clock stops. That's something I always time to order in with DoorDash. In the Baltimore area where I am, there's a lot of stuff such as underground pizza, sushi, hana, all types of food with it. Plus, with DoorDash, you can score football season's best deals on groceries, restaurants, and more. You can get 50% off of up to $10 value. Spend $15 or more on your first order when you're now in the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED. These epic exchange terms apply. Again, 50% off of $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you're now in the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED33. Epic exchange terms apply. Plus, you can even get prepared before game day. Stack up on your favorite appetizers and order all your tailgate gear on DoorDash, then get ready to watch your team win. One more time, don't forget to use code LOCKEDON for 50% off up to $10 value when your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. Some exchange terms apply. And this show is sponsored by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. Some superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 120 million parts of your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Also, as all the exclusions apply, eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to these customers. We're back to our second segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We talked with David Harrison in the first segment of Locked On Commanders about Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury going to Washington. Now we're going to be talking with Corbin Smith of Locked On Seahawks about Mike Macdonald making the move from Baltimore to Seattle coming up now. It took a little longer than maybe Seahawks fans anticipated, but they got their head coach in Mike Macdonald, former Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator, and they waited on him for the Ravens season to end, and it seemed like he was their guy from almost the beginning. Here to talk about that with me, Corbin Smith, the host of Locked On Seahawks, joins me. And Corbin, I can just tell that the energy in Seattle right now after this Mike Macdonald hire, people are excited about it, but how excited are you that the Seahawks went with Mike Macdonald and went in this direction?
I'm going to go with a 9.5 out of 10. Anybody that listens to our show knows that I don't usually throw around the term perfect, so I'm not going to quite go to that realm. But when the Seahawks, when there was some murmurs going around, I had heard some things as early as November that there was a possibility either Carroll could retire or that the Seahawks could decide to give him an ultimatum. We're going to do this or you're gone. I started thinking about head coaching candidates, and I go back to that Ravens-Seahawks game in Baltimore, and just what that defense did to the Seahawks offense from start to finish. It was an absolute annihilation from the opening snap on. And John Schneider even referenced that game as one where this guy is on my radar now. I need to look at this guy. So from the beginning of this coaching search, he was the one that I was most interested in among all the coaching candidates. I liked Ben Johnson from the Lions, but there's just something about the way this guy carries himself. And I saw what he did at Michigan. I saw what he did the last 2 years at Baltimore. And Seattle's biggest issue has been defense, not offense. So bringing in a mastermind defensive coach that is now the youngest coach in the NFL, sign me up for it.
And I think for a lot of people in Seattle, it's about him maximizing the talent they have on defense. Corbin, they've done a great job over the past couple of years of bringing in really good quality young talent to this defense and guys who potential is sky high. And I know the big name everyone's talking about is Devin Witherspoon, who Mike Macdonald made it a point to talk about in his introductory press conference. How do you think Mike Macdonald's going to get the best out of these players? Because in Baltimore, you have players like Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith, but Seattle does have some talent to play with for Macdonald.
Seattle does not have a Kyle Hamilton on the roster. However, Devin Witherspoon offers very similar flexibility. We are talking about a guy that's an incredible blitzer. And oh, by the way, Mike Macdonald likes to blitz his DBs. This is a guy that had 3 sacks this year. He is incredibly good at getting after the quarterback. He's a physical player. He can play boundary and in the slot. You can move him all over the place. He is a willing tackler. In fact, sometimes too willing. He likes to throw his body around. So Witherspoon, there's a reason that was the name he mentioned first. But I'm looking at players like Reek Woolen, who didn't have the best sophomore season, and some fans have soured on him a little bit. But I think Mike Macdonald is going to look at those skills and what he did as a rookie, the turnover creating ability. He's got to be drooling about putting those two together in his scheme. And then if they can bring back Jordan Brooks at linebacker, I think Brooks is still a very high ceiling player that was limited a little bit because he had an ACL injury a couple years ago. But this is a guy that's got great sideline speed. He is an intense competitor, as intense of a competitor as the Seahawks have on their roster. I think he is going to mesh well if they can re-sign him. Maybe Patrick Queen comes over, but I think Jordan Brooks has a chance to be re-signed, and I think that Mike Macdonald is going to have some fun with him. And up front, they've got some pieces. If they can re-sign Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed's a really solid veteran. Boy, Mafe is still raw, and he had 9.5 sacks this year. So there are some pieces. Uchenna Nwosu is a really good all-around player, still a young guy in the prime of his career. There are pieces here. The question is going to be, how is he going to maximize all those guys? And what is this scheme going to look like compared to what he did in Baltimore? He's made it clear, hey, I may do some things differently because this is not an identical defense, but there's way too much talent here for this to be a group that finished 24th in scoring defense last year. So he's got to be looking at the pieces he's got there and thinking, add a couple pieces here, mix and match. I got a chance to have a really good defense here.
And I think whenever an NFL team or any team in sports hires a head coach, part of the reason is sometimes maybe there's going to be a new culture that's set with a new head coach. And Mike Macdonald is a player's coach. He has the pulse of his players and someone who his players look up to, respect to, and want to play for, want to go to war for every Sunday. So, Corbin, what do you think the culture is going to look like under Mike Macdonald, and how might it differ from what it's been like in Seattle over the past couple of seasons?
Well, I don't expect to see, and we'll see, the basketball hoop was still in there on Thursday in the auditorium, but I'm expecting there's going to be some changes in how practice is conducted and some of the things that happen in meeting rooms. I mean, this is going to be a new era. Mike Macdonald made it clear he is going to be him. He's going to be me. He's not going to try to emulate Pete Carroll. These guys have different personalities, but it's kind of like Jim versus John Harbaugh. You know, there's different processes, different ways they behave, but they get to the same endpoint. And that is what Mike Macdonald's hoping to do. Can he get to where Pete Carroll got at his peak here in Seattle and get this team competing for Super Bowls? And one of the things John Schneider made very clear from the outset of this coaching search, they wanted to hire somebody. He had a directive from Chair Jody Allen, get somebody that is going to maintain the culture that we have here, because that was a major strength for Pete Carroll. And I think that they wanted to have somebody coming from an organization that was very similar in that aspect. And I think the Ravens are the most similar organization to the Seahawks in terms of the way they operate, the players they draft, you name it. These two teams, these two franchises mirror each other a lot. So that was another reason I thought this guy is going to be high on the priority list. And it's a good fit from that standpoint, culture-wise.
And you mentioned earlier about maybe a Patrick Queen coming over, and free agency's creeping up on us, Corbin. It's going to be here, I think, before we know it. For Seattle, where are some of your biggest needs, and where do you think Mike Macdonald could really look to attack in free agency to get not only the defense, but the Seahawks back to where they want to go?
There's two positions that jump out. On defense, it's clearly linebacker. All three of the guys that started games last year, Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, Devin Bush, they're all going to be unrestricted free agents on March 13th. Maybe Wagner at the right price is somebody that Mike Macdonald would have interest bringing back because he's still a really solid player. He was a second-team All-Pro this year, and he deserved it. He had a good year. A lot of things crumpled around him late in the season, but he played really at a high level for a 33-year-old linebacker. Jordan Brooks makes sense to bring back. Bush as a reserve guy, I don't think he's going to cost a lot of money, might make some sense. That is a position that is a major question mark. And on the offensive side of the ball, they've got Damian Lewis set to hit free agency, 4-year starter at guard. They have had major issues with rotating guys year after year at center and guard. They've got to find stability there. So maybe that is a position, somebody like a Kevin Zeitler. We don't need somebody here that's going to be a starter for 10 years, but can he start a couple more years and still play at a high level? Somebody that you're familiar with and you know is going to play physical football. There are some things they've got to figure out. That interior O-line has been an issue for basically most of the Pete Carroll era. They have got to find some guys that are long-term answers there and really bolster that group to allow this offense to play to its potential with all the skill players they've got.
Corbin and Seattle fans very happy about the Mike Macdonald hire, and I think rightfully so. For more on Corbin's work, check him out over at the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Rounding out the show, we have Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans talking Brian Callahan and that Tennessee team. Stay tuned. A lot to get to in Locked On NFL. First, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. And for me, Super Bowl is a great time to spend with family and friends. And plus, you get the game, the food, the commercials. It's all great. But a Super Bowl bet that I like over on FanDuel is definitely Christian McCaffrey overs, any over, and plus most anytime bets with him too. Anytime touchdown over on yards from McCaffrey. That Chiefs run defense, it's not wonderful. I think McCaffrey can take advantage of that for the 49ers. FanDuel, so many ways for you to end your season with a win or two, or maybe even three. Not only can you bet who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has best bets for which players scored a touchdown, how many points have we scored, and so much more. New customers, Jordan Leo, get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. This is FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more of FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. Thanks so much for tuning in today, making Locked On NFL your first listen every day, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening in audio form. Really, really appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe in any platform, whether it's video, audio, the whole 9 yards. We're 5 days a week of NFL content, news, analysis, updates. We have it all here for you on Locked On NFL. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the Tennessee Titans with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans. And then after Tyler, I'm going to reveal my pick for who won the NFL coaching cycle, and I'll explain why. But first, let's get into our conversation with Tyler. The Tennessee Titans moved on from Mike Vrabel, and their next head coach is former Cincinnati Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. And people in Tennessee seem excited about the shift. Here to talk about that with me is a man I know is excited about it too, Tyler Rowland, the host of Locked On Titans. And Tyler, I think some people are a little taken off guard by Mike Vrabel not returning to Tennessee. They make the move from Vrabel to Callahan. Was this the right move for Tennessee to move on from a coach I think a lot of people nationally really liked and move to Callahan, who I know Joe Burrow was injured last season, have to take that into account. But some people might call the move uninspiring, but other people really like it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where Mike Vrabel is a well-known commodity in the NFL. And I think Mike Vrabel appeals to a lot of the sensibilities of what people like about football. He's tough. He's, a man's man out there running the football team, former NFL player. And here's another thing, Kevin, is the Titans are not very well respected nationally by outside fan bases, by national media sources, things like that. The Titans are just kind of a team that's there. So when you recognize someone like Mike Vrabel and you see him take the Titans to certain heights like the AFC Championship game and then the number 1 seed, I think it's easy for people who don't cover the team on a daily basis to be like, well, when a crappy team like the Titans does those good things, why would you get rid of the coach that did it? But when you look closer, Mike Vrabel, 3 out of the 6 seasons, 27th in scoring or less. The Titans offense was just not on a modern NFL level. And a lot of that has to do with Mike Vrabel and the way that he approaches football. So while Mike Vrabel is a good football coach, I don't think that he was the right football coach for this team. And I think Brian Callahan is exactly that. When you look at Ben Johnson and you look at Bobby Slowick going back and not taking jobs, I think it might be fair to say that out of coaches who are offensive gurus, you would include maybe Jim Harbaugh in this, but he's more of a CEO type guy who hires good coordinators. To me, you talk about like an offensive play caller and that modern type of coach that teams are looking for. Brian Callahan is exactly that. And for a team like the Titans, who hasn't scored 30 points in over 2 years and hasn't scored enough points in the last few years, you really need somebody to come in with an offensive touch and modernize this team. The Titans are in the process of a full modernization, not just in the coaching staff, but in the front office with Rand Carthon and Chad Brinker. They really restructured their organization this year to match some of the better teams in the NFL, like the Ravens, like the 49ers, like the Rams, teams who do it the modern forward-thinking way. And I think that Brian Callahan is a symbol of a philosophical shift within the Titans organization to modernize and go from Main Street to Wall Street and try to catch up with these other teams. So I think it's an excellent hire, and I get why there was some pushback with letting go of Vrabel, but he didn't get a job right away. And I think a lot of people crushed the Titans because they let go of a hot candidate who would be swooped up right away. Well, I think we're learning here that maybe other teams don't want to do it the Vrabel way either, and they realize there's a better way to do it in the modern NFL, and the Titans finally realized that and made the tough decision. But I think Callahan presents a great opportunity for the Titans to really take some steps forward as a football team.
And you mentioned coordinators a little earlier in your first answer there, Tyler. Mm-hmm. How has Brian Callahan started to fill out his staff with whether it be coordinators, assistant coaches, and are you excited about those moves he's making?
Yeah, I think he's doing an excellent job right now. Now, obviously, it all remains to be seen. You need to win football games if you want your coaching staff to be praised. But I think the approach and where the Titans are putting the emphasis is very important. So Brian Callahan is a quarterback guru. He's worked with Peyton Manning, Matthew Stafford, Joe Burrow, obviously got the best out of Jake Browning. He's known as a pass-first, quarterback-centric teacher. And that's what he needs to be for this team, who has Will Levis, who they need to get the most out of on a rookie quarterback contract. And I think while people are up and down on Levis, I think he's shown enough that they can build around him going forward. And then look at what they attacked after that. They bring in Denard Wilson, who, as someone who covers the Ravens, you know about Denard Wilson, was with the Philadelphia Eagles in 2022, number one pass defense, comes over, is with the Ravens in 2023, number one pass defense. I'm not giving him the credit for their performances, but being around the system that created that performance, I think that's important. And Denard Wilson was a sought-after candidate and chose Tennessee, which is something that kind of doesn't feel familiar for Titans fans. We're being the team that gets chosen by coaches that have options. So Denard Wilson coming over, he's a pass game specialist. The Titans need help in the secondary. And then on the offensive side of the ball, the Titans need help at wide receiver. They get Nick Holes at offensive coordinator from Jacksonville, who's kind of a wide receiver specialist. And then the Titans really needed the most help at offensive line. You bring over Bill Callahan, who some consider the best offensive line coach ever. He's definitely one of the best in the NFL right now. So the Titans are going out and getting talent at certain positions on the coaching staff where they need it: quarterback, wide receiver, secondary, offensive line. But one other thing I want to point out is the diversity of wisdom that the Titans are bringing in. Callahan is 39 years old. Brian Callahan, the head coach, he's 39 years old. Denard Wilson, 41 years old. Nick Holes is another guy who's in his 40s. These are young coaches, and there's going to be ups and downs. Well, on the back end, wide receiver coach Tyke Tolbert in his 50s. Bill Callahan obviously led the Raiders to a Super Bowl nearly 2 decades ago. He has a ton of experience. They bring in Steven Jackson and Frank Bush, who are defensive position coaches who are in their 50s with a ton of experience. I'm not trying to make it just about age, but when you have young coaches who are kind of the innovative, forward-thinking guys who know what they need to do schematically in the NFL these days, having some of these wise old coaches who have been around for decades to help teach that message and have the younger coaches lean on, I think that's very important as well. So not only the skill sets and the emphasis of the coaches that the Titans have brought in, but the varied wisdom and experience on the staff, very, very important to supplement Brian Callahan. So I think not only is Callahan a great hire and the stuff the Titans have been doing are great things for the team, but the staff that they're using to supplement and support Brian Callahan is just absolutely perfect right now.
I think the Titans did make a good move in hiring Brian Callahan. It's not necessarily the flashiest move ever, but the history is there, and I think that at the end of the day, it'll pan out for Tennessee, at least hopefully for them. But I think for me, I have to go with Mike Macdonald and the Seahawks as who won this coaching cycle. I just think he, in my opinion, look, maybe it's a little Ravens bias, right? Maybe a little, but I just feel like he was the prize of this whole thing. Seattle waited. They got their guy. They can build the staff around him. And of course, they got to get the players. And it's not just all about the coach. If you don't have the players, you can't really succeed. But I think that with Seattle, the Carroll firing was a little shocking to some. But I think it's fresh blood. It's a new opportunity for Seattle. I think, in my opinion, Seattle won this head coaching cycle. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thanks so much for tuning in. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.